Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm Elliot Margolis, and I'm here with my two co-hosts, Gail Burke and George Binns. And today we're going to talk about what's going on in the United States with the COVID, with the president, and with the press. And are you getting ready to get this election over with? So, George, why don't we start with you?
Well, the thing that bothers me most about this whole COVID thing is, yes, it's a serious disease. It's a new virus that we don't have any natural immunity for, or very, very little. And it's taking a toll. Unfortunately, that's the only way that we as a species can get adapted to it, is let it run its course. I mean, this is the same story with the infamous Spanish flu of 1918. And if you get into some of the incidental stuff of that one, there was all sorts of hell broke loose when President Woodrow Wilson caught the Spanish flu. And some of the outcome of that was it put him in such a weakened condition that a couple of years later, he apparently had a stroke. So it's a serious problem. But I think the exaggeration of what's going on has been carried too far. The governor said, okay, if your city is a green zone, which means you've got not too many cases and not too many deaths, you can expand your operation. But Salem and Beverly decided that, oh no, we're going to still keep the restaurants at partial occupancy. And this is where the real problem is going to come in, that the economy is just going to hell in a handbasket, and it's not going to recover easy.
George, from what I read in the paper, it was the Board of Health that made the decision to keep things the way they are and not to open up anymore. How do they have that kind of authority? They're unelected people.
Yeah. Well, I think the trick of the game is they advise the mayor, but you can raise the same question about the mayor. What is his authority to shut down anything, or the governors, or the presidents? You look at the Constitution, and basically it says you don't shut the government down, the economy down at your whim. You need some sort of authority to do it.
And well, here's where I'm going to disagree with you, George, and that is COVID is so difficult and so unique that, as President Trump has said, we have a war against it. In wartime, you have special authority. And if he didn't close down the economy, and if we didn't close down certain stores, and if we didn't ask people to wear masks and social distance, then the Democrats would have been right. We might have had 200 million people die. But by having the control to cut things off, we've saved a lot of lives.
Well, if you want to get a little picky about it, technically, he's been using something called the War Powers Act to exercise this kind of authority. And if you check it out realistically, it's the governors of the various states who are actually issuing the orders to social distance and wear masks and all that kind of stuff. So it's not necessarily a national one. What the president did is he did shut down the transportation from China. And where I think the problem got really nasty was didn't recognize that the COVID had escaped China and gotten into Italy. And the flights out of Italy into the East Coast were probably the more devastating than the ones coming out of China into the West Coast.
But George, there was so much that we didn't know when the thing first started. The president knew enough that it was China that started it in the first place and let it go without telling the United States. So I think he did, from what I understand, he gave the powers to the governors and to some of the mayors. But I think it was mostly to the governors. And each governor, because they know their own state better than the president does, was allowed to set the rules. Unfortunately for Massachusetts, we have a governor who has no spine, so that he not only set the rules, but he kept them going. Now that the state has entered the green zone, he has kind of let loose the reins a little bit. But like you said, cities like Beverly, Cambridge, and Salem decided not to do that now. I don't know whether it's just a coincidence, but those are two of the most liberal cities in the Commonwealth. And Beverly seems to be following behind them.
Well, see, you're bringing up a point that's very important and that most people in this country do not understand, particularly the liberals, okay? The point is, the United States is not a democracy.
Right.
It's a democratic republic. And most people don't understand what that really means. But a democratic republic, according to our Constitution, is basically we're 50 different states that have authority, and then we have one union for protection, say military or something like that. But the 50 states have to make their own decisions. It's sort of like when we had Katrina down in New Orleans, and everybody was blaming George Bush for all the problems. The fact of the matter is, George Bush was president, but he had to be asked by the governor of Louisiana to come in and help. And until that happened, legally, he couldn't go in and help. And it's the mayor of New Orleans that had to ask the governor to ask the president. That's the way the system works. So in the case of COVID, the governors control the states.
Right.
And the governors have to make the decisions, but it's the federal government that can give you guidelines. But it's the governors that have the authority. President Trump cannot say to a governor, you need to do this. The governor has to do it on his own. That's what the Democratic Republic is. That's what most people don't understand. They blame Trump when the reality is it's the governors.
Well, and then you have Governor Cuomo, who sent all those COVID patients, the elderly, forced them to go to nursing homes, who's now denying it. It had nothing to do with the president. He did that. And now he says he didn't do it. There were, I think, 11,000 elderly that died in those nursing homes. And he's denying it. So,
you know, the interesting thing is statistics that I heard today, that basically 99.1% of all the people, basically they'll get sick, but they'll recover.
right.
And then it goes by different ages. And the worst age, of course, is the over 70. I don't know how people get that old, but, you know,
Be careful there.
I know. But over 70, the survival rate is still over 95%. So, you know, we've gone a long way to making this a recoverable disease. We've got a ways to go. We need a vaccine, but President Trump has done one heck of a good job in getting the science and the scientists to get the job done to help with this. And obviously they've done a pretty good job with those kind of statistics. What is the statistic, I wonder, of how many people survive heart attacks? Probably not as good as 98 or 99%.
Yeah.
I don't know, George, you probably have that filed some part in your brain, don't you?
Well, I think the point I would like to emphasize that you started to bring up is you seldom hear about the statistics of survival rates or the distribution of fatalities by age, by morbidity. And you start to get into some of these things, and everybody and his brother, I shouldn't say everybody, the mainstream media keeps emphasizing how many new cases that we have discovered. Well, the number of new cases really depends upon how aggressively you go out and test. And I think, as you were pointing out, Elliot, most of the people get exposed to it. They have some symptoms and it goes away. But they're still carrying the antibodies around in their system that said, oh, you had it. So they classify them as infected. But the real issue comes down to one of how many people die per 100,000. And you start to look at those kind of statistics, and you find out that there are certain hotspots around. The East Coast is one of them, Northeast Coast. And for instance, Massachusetts has a death per 100,000. It's more than 120 per 100,000. Nationally, it's down in the 80 number. So there's a lot of areas in this country that it's not a big deal.
And also, just to point out, George, that internationally, the United States is nowhere near the top in the percentage of deaths per million.
No, I
They're
think
nowhere near the top. We have a lot of deaths. Yeah, we have a lot of deaths compared to Italy or Germany or France, but we also have a heck of a lot more people than Italy, Germany, and France. So of course we're going to have more deaths. It's a statistic that the mainstream media is using to tell you that Trump is not doing a good job, when in fact, if you compare it by how many people per million, we're doing very well as a country.
I think so.
Well,
Well,
I think you raised the other issue that the real virus that is running loose in this country that is causing more problems is TDS, and it's badly infected the mainstream media. That no matter how they look at the data, it's always got to be presented as though, as you point out, Trump did it.
Yep.
And as a result, we don't get a straight story, and it's hard to think your way through. What should I be doing? And
look what happened when he made the announcement that he had it. The mainstream media were almost gleeful. Well, of course he has it. It's his own fault. Look what he's done. He's been out without a mask. And they went on and on and on, never, ever saying, oh my word, that's terrible. The leader of the country. They're taking him off to the hospital. He must be really sick. And his wife is too. But the media didn't even miss a beat. And they were jumping all over him, criticizing him. I mean, it was just awful, some of the things they said. But interestingly enough, it was the next day, it was 2 days later, there was a huge parade in Manhattan, a car parade with all the Trump supporters tooting their horns. And they took over Fifth Avenue. And most of them came in from Long Island, and they stopped traffic right in front of Trump Tower. Well wishes for the president, waving their banners and their flags and their Trump signs. I mean, it was really a marvelous sight to see that, you know, there are a lot of people here who support this president and felt bad.
And you know what else is important to note too, is when Trump left Walter Reed, and he was talking about how good he felt, and he hasn't felt this well in a long time, things like that. The press got on his back for saying something like that.
Yep.
But, you know, here's the thing. He's a cheerleader for the country. He wants people to move forward. Would you rather have him say, oh, I felt horrible, I think I'm going to die?
Yeah.
What kind of a response would the press give him then? You know,
What kind of a
they might
response?
say, gee, I can't wait till you do die. But the bottom line is he is number one cheerleader for this country. And that's the job that he's doing. That's called leadership.
Well, I think the thing you mentioned is what would happen if he said, geez, I feel horrible and I think I'm going to die.
Yeah.
What would happen to the stock market? The day
Exactly.
he went into the hospital, the market took a hit.
Yeah.
And that tells you that there's a lot of people in this country that depend upon the things he's doing to improve the economy.
That's right.
And the concern, I believe, that everybody recognizes, if somebody else gets in there, are they going to be as aggressive as he is, trying to make things better, as
Certainly
opposed
not
to?
certainly not Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I mean, they are just threatening all sorts of things, raising taxes, doing all sorts of things, healthcare and whatever. But I did want to mention that once before, when President Reagan was shot, we never knew how close he came to death, because he was another cheerleader for the country, cheerleader for the people. We didn't know for many years how sick he really was, how badly he was injured, because you see him in the hospital window waving to people. And I mean, this is what a real leader does. You have to do that when you're the leader of a country.
None of us remember this, I don't think. Maybe you do, George. I can't. But when FDR said, all we have to fear is fear itself, he was the number one cheerleader in the country.
Yeah.
And nobody criticized him for being a cheerleader for the country.
No.
That's what I think we have for a president right now, a cheerleader. And he's being criticized for it. And if he was negative, he'd be criticized for that. There is nothing that Donald Trump can do that the mainstream media will say, gee, that was good.
But
Nothing.
you know what's really bad? And this is how bad the media and the people who support the mainstream media and the politicians, this is how bad it gets. Was also struck with the virus, and some of the horrible things that was said on tweets by members of the media. It was really, really disgusting. She's the first lady of the country, and you have to be nasty. I mean, really, really nasty remarks, hoping she would die. And she finally came out and made a statement. She said that, you know, she and her husband had the virus. They were reassuring the American public that she's fine at home at the White House, and offered continued prayers for victims of the coronavirus and their families. She's a very gracious lady. And just like her husband, they can find nothing but criticism for her. I think it's disgusting.
It's definitely disgusting. And when you consider how gracious she is and what a classy lady she is, isn't it interesting that no magazine will put her on the cover? Nobody will give her good press.
No.
And yet she is a model first lady. It's discouraging that the press has to be this way. Why can't the press just say the news?
Because most of them are Democrats, and they have never forgiven Trump for winning the election, and they never will. It was supposed to be Hillary Clinton. They were all geared up for it. You remember election night. What happened election night? They
Yeah,
were
when some of the women
crying.
reporters were crying,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, it was just horrible. And they have never let him forget it. What are they going to do when he wins re-election?
Well, that's going to be an interesting question, Gail.
It's going to be
I'm going to
fun.
back up a bit to your discussion about FDR. And a lot of people don't recognize the similarity between FDR and President Trump. In that when FDR was running for president back in the early 30s, most of the newspapers were pro-Republican, and they wouldn't give him the time of day. So he invented something called the fireside chat, where he would get on the radio periodically and he would talk directly to the American people. And that's how he got his message across. And as you say, he became the cheerleader that got us into the war and through it for the most part and out of it. Well, Donald Trump comes along and the media has switched its allegiance and it's now extremely leftist, liberal. So in order for him to get the message to the people, he goes on Twitter. The analogy is unbelievable.
That is
He's
interesting.
very effective at it.
Yes, it is.
And he suckers the media into carrying his message because every time he says something, they have to criticize it. So he gets double coverage.
I just want to say something that you mentioned earlier. TDS, for those who don't know what TDS is, it's Trump derangement syndrome. I had a moment when I wasn't sure either, George, so I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, it's a virus that's running rampant through the liberal community.
The thing that is scary is, can you imagine if the press was objective and just did their job?
Yeah.
Can you imagine how much Trump would win this election by? Because of all the good things he's done.
Yeah.
The employment situation, the stock market the way it is, the protecting the border, the new trade deals. Everything that he's done has helped this country, and he gets no credit for it, and we're so much better off.
How about negotiating deals between Israel and some countries in the Middle East?
Yeah,
No other president's been able to do what he has and gone.
And he's been nominated for what,
three times, three Nobel Prizes.
Three Nobel Prizes.
Yep. I don't think the press even mentions it.
No, I don't think they've mentioned it either, because that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Peace in the Middle East and getting people opposed to Iran all at the same time and siding with Israel.
Right.
That's a good thing that nobody knows. See, that's part of the problem with the press. The press doesn't tell you the good stuff.
No.
And if his tie isn't on straight, they'll start complaining about the fact that he doesn't know how to dress himself.
Right.
It's very frustrating.
Well, they're very concerned about the Secret Service getting too close to him when he decided to go out and take a ride, and just to show people that he was okay.
And you don't think they weren't protected?
He was unprotected. They all had masks on. They had a plastic shield between him and the Secret Service people.
Yeah.
But the press didn't even mention that. You cannot win with these people. You just can't. It's like living here at Brooksby. I face this all the time. There's so many liberals that live here.
The lives that I see on Facebook and the fact that people don't understand the timeline. They blame Trump for COVID. But, in January, Trump put the travel ban on for starting February 2nd. Okay, he gave a State of the Union address. And in the State of the Union address, he pointed out we have to deal with COVID, and Nancy Pelosi rips it up. Congress was more concerned about impeaching the president than saving American lives.
Right.
We are almost near the end already, if you can believe it. So why don't we say our closing remarks? George, you've been quiet lately. Let's hear it from you.
Well, again, I think the issue comes down to one of, we don't have any decent information about what's going on. The media has changed its modus operandi, if you will. It used to be, if it bleeds, it leads. Now it's, if it's outrageous, it is what bleeds. And anybody can concoct an outrageous story. And we're seeing this with the Supreme Court pick that Trump made. She's being vilified, and it's all because she's a Catholic. And if you read the Constitution, one of the things it says is there is no religious test for any government office. And yet they're starting to create one. Like you mentioned, where do these people get the idea that we can rewrite everything that the Constitution is put in place just because it's convenient and we can stab somebody with it?
And if the Democrats wanted, if the Democrats heard the Republicans saying something about, gee, that person's a Jew or that person's a Catholic, they would start in saying you're racist, you're prejudiced, you're this, you're that. Democrats can do it, but Republicans can't have a very highly qualified woman get on the Supreme Court because, oh, the other thing about her, just very quickly, if the Supreme Court gets rid of Roe v. Wade, doesn't mean a thing because the states can also pass laws for Roe v. For abortion, states' rights. That's what I talked about earlier this morning, or this afternoon, whenever. Gail, close it out.
Okay, well, I just want to make one comment about the Supreme Court pick. I think no matter who it was, they would still have demonized the person, male or female, just as they did with Justice Kavanaugh, because that's who they are.
Right.
Anyway, I want to thank everybody for watching. We've enjoyed this. We haven't done this in a while, the three of us, and we always find some interesting things to talk about. So please stay tuned for our next show, and we'll see you soon.